And we're back, folks. This is Radio Free Market, and I'm your host, Michael McKay, and with me is Mr. Doug French, and we're talking about just what kind of person runs for political office anyway. And we were talking about H.L. Mencken just before the break, and you were going to talk a little bit more about the kind of skill set that is necessary to be in politics as opposed to be in the real world.
Yeah, I think that Lew Rockwell actually has said it best. You know, the only while competition in the marketplace improves quality, competition in politics does just the opposite. And because politicians thrive, they reach the top by lying, cheating, manipulating, stealing, and killing. And so that's why the price of political services is constantly increasing.
I'd like everybody to, I'm sorry I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. If everybody would take out a pencil and piece of paper and write down this term, the price of political services. Holy cow, what a great term, Doug. That's absolutely incredible. People should think about that, and that it is constantly increasing.
Yeah, I was recently in Las Vegas, where the housing market has been decimated, and I was talking to one of my ex-customers, and the price of everything has gone down except one thing. That's the price of water permits. They have tripled. So the price of government continues to increase, and we see this over and over. But it's run by people who are not running a business for the benefit of supposedly the customers or the participants in this democracy. They run this organization for the benefit of themselves.
So now, F.A. Hayek famously argued in The Road to Serfdom that in politics the worst get on top, and outlined 3 reasons this is so. If you would comment on these.
Yeah, Hayek really, this is from my favorite chapter in The Road to Serfdom, and I know this is a book that's gotten a lot of attention lately, and people should really pick it up and read it. But Hayek identifies 3 reasons why the worst get on top, and the first one is that we have to descend to the regions of lower moral and intellectual standards where the more primitive instincts prevail, to have a uniformity of opinion. And so for a politician to appeal to the broadest range of people, to get a consensus opinion, which is what democracy is all about, then you have to descend to these regions. Second, those on top must, in his words, gain the support of the docile and gullible. That means that, and just think about political advertising. We're just being deluged with these just nonsensical attack ads that probably have a grain of truth in it, but again, these ads are targeted for the docile and the gullible who will believe anything, who can be molded and shaped into whatever opinion you want
and
to be.
Totalitarians and statists depend on those who are guided by their passions and emotions rather than critical thinking.
That's absolutely right. And then the third, leaders don't promote a positive agenda, but it's always a negative one. We have to hate an enemy. We have to envy the wealthy to appeal to the masses. Hayek said leaders must preach an us against them program. Well, we see this constantly. Wall Street.
Hayek also, he said that advancement within a totalitarian group or party depends largely on the willingness to do immoral things. That's a very cynical kind of thing, don't you think?
Well, it's very cynical, and I think it's been proven out over and over again. And I think every city I've lived, if I've spent any time there, the local people say, boy, can you believe the politics here? These politicians have to be the worst than they are anywhere in the country. And I say, you know what? They were just as bad the place I came from. And whether it's at the local level or the state level or at the federal level, the politicians do despicable things, and I am not shocked that that more are or that the number of politicians that are indicted, I'm shocked that there aren't more that are indicted, because this is how you get to the top in politics. When you're trading favors in the marketplace, artificial barriers created by government, and if that's what you have to trade and that's for sale, then you're going to have constant political corruption.
Well, you just used a great phrase, artificial barriers are for sale, because these are the barriers that are thrown up by government on behalf of special interests and vested interests to either limit trade or give individual advantage to certain groups over others. And to trade in those gives an eerie kind of depiction to that as a marketplace. Is the key that those wishing to get elected and stay elected must be prepared to break every moral rule they have ever known if they, in their mind, the end justifies it?
Well, I think that's absolutely it. And again, they're willing to, if they've learned any morality, if they've learned any good common sense during their upbringing, they've got to cast that aside if they want to, especially if they want to play in the big show, let's call it, in Washington, D.C. Some of the local politics, these people appear very clumsy, but once you get to Washington, it's almost hard to get indicted. It's almost hard to get brought up on ethics charges because these guys get good at it. They get good at lying. They get good at cheating. They get good at stealing. And that's why Mencken called an election an advance auction of stolen goods. And I think that very much wraps it up in this wonderful campaign season we're having.
Yeah, well, I like what you reported, that economist Frank Knight said that those in authority would have to do these things whether they wanted to or not, and the probability of the people in power being individuals who would dislike the possession and exercise of power is on a level with the probability that an extremely tender-hearted person would get the job of whipping master in a slave plantation. Eek.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, politics is not for the faint of heart, and it's not for those who lie awake at night worrying about whether they accepted the wrong change from the girl at the checkout counter. These folks don't think nothing of picking people's pocket and turning around and trying to convince the person whose pocket they picked that they are the better for it.
Yet politicians are always saying they're promoting freedom. Are they talking about personal freedom?
Well, no, exactly. They're talking about freedom. A collective freedom is promised, which doesn't mean freedom for individual people of society, but instead this unlimited freedom of government planner to do with society what he pleases. So the freedom that they're talking about is for them, not us.
So talk about accountability, if you would. Would you comment on that?
Well,
there is no
accountability, and as I write in a piece, the higher the office, the more criminal wrongdoing a person can get away with, and I think that's true. I mean, when we look at the people on Capitol Hill, we just scratch our heads at what they're able to do and pass it off as doing the people's work. That's one of my favorite phrases. We're up here doing the people's work. I think they're up there working the people over. But as Mencken wrote, there's, because of this, there's a psychic impossibility of a gentleman to hold office under the federal union. And I think that's right. I mean, now I know your listeners have one or two people in mind, and of course I have one in mind that's an exception to all this. But I think when we look at the broad spectrum of people out there, we have a lot of rich people. We have a lot of rich people in office, and you wonder just what is your motivation for being there.
Right. So, I like also this other comment by Mark Twain, no distinctly Native American criminal class exists except Congress.
Right.
Yeah, so let's switch gears here a little bit. We're going to run into the break in just another minute or so, so we'll just start this ball rolling. I would like to ask you to start, but then we'll develop it more. Please talk about how democracy, which has been described as two wolves and a chicken voting on what's for dinner, compares to monarchy.
Right. I think the person who's done the most work on this is Hans Hermann Hoppe, who was, as you mentioned, a member of my thesis committee, and I was so fortunate for that. But he's written an amazing book called Democracy, the God That Failed, that everyone should pick up and read. And Hans promotes the idea of a monarchy as opposed to a democracy, because in a monarchy, the monarch's family will have a long-term perspective. They'll have a lower time preference, if you will, in terms of the assets of the state and the functioning of government. Whereas in a democracy, people are there for a fairly limited time, and they tend to loot the republic as quickly as they can, and do not think about long-term consequences. They just think about. Well,
this is a very provocative idea, and we're going to have to kind of take another break now, and so we'll come back to this, and I'd like you to develop that a little bit more when we come back. So please stay with us, folks. This is Radio Free Market, and I'm your host, Michael McKay. I'm talking to Mr. Doug French, and we're talking about what kind of person runs for political office. Please stay with us.